Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them so you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that will work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable coaching to learn more.
Dean, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, Collin.
Today, I'm excited because this is a different episode. And I know I sometimes say this. I find it fun to bring a different perspective to the podcast, to the show. And I think one of those different perspectives is the sort of Venn diagram I have between sales leader, salesperson, and founder. And this is going to be one of those conversations that kind of overlaps between the sales and the founder space. We're going to get into, we're going to be talking about an experiment, a sales experiment that Dean ran here. But we're going to cover, outbound. We're going to cover basically everything from outbound to customer development. Now, if you don't know Dean, he's the co-founder, CEO of a company called Loop. If you're hiring SDRs, you should probably check it out. It is, I won't swear, but the coolest tool I've seen in HR possibly ever. Our team is using it and it's great. That shameless plug out of the way. Dean didn't ask me to do that. I like the tool. I think it's neat. And so I will do that if we're actually using it. But Dean, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Me too, man. Me too.
Right on. So we're talking about a 3-month sales experiment. Talk to me about why. There's so many founders I run into. They're like, oh, we're just going to do some outbound. They're going to build a team. And I've been guilty of this as well. I'm going to try something new with the company. You do it for 3 months, 6 months. There's no finishing bound on it. It's just something you do. And then it's like, hey, we had a customer success team for a while. And then, I didn't approach it as an experiment, right? It was just a thing that ran forever. Where did the idea for the experiment come? And then let's talk about the experiment itself.
Yeah. Where the experiment came from was, I think my co-founder we were both working pretty hard and feeling like it was a little bit of a slog. And we were just like, let's try this thing that we're doing for 3 months and see what happens. Let's just see what happens. We're working on something. And if we make progress within 3 months, that's great. And if we don't make progress on it, then, that teaches us something as well. So it was, I remember the date, it was January 25th. And we were like, let's see, we actually, I'm going to take a quick step back. We had an idea where we were for a while, I'll talk about how we started our company. This is, I'm tripping all over myself right now, but
okay. That's all right.
Yeah, man. So we used to run an outsourcing company, and that was a previous lifetime. But our big selling point to companies actually was we had this great assessment that my co-founder had the idea of building, where instead of just giving people a multiple choice test, we actually had this job simulator for customer support outsourcing. And so we used that to screen people and match people to companies. And whenever we tried to close a new customer, we'd show them the assessment. And a lot of the times the light bulb would go off and they'd be like, oh, this is awesome. We'll use you guys. And so we ended up actually deciding to focus on that business. And so we did that for a while. And we had this idea where we were like, well, we're doing this for support. And it's going, okay, people kind of want to use this, but there aren't that many people who are actually hiring a ton of customer support people. So maybe we could use this same job simulator philosophy for another type of job. And so we had this idea of we've been doing support for a while. It's growing kind of steadily, but also it feels like people kind of want different things. So let's try for 3 months. Let's just try building this assessment for sales. And at that point, we kind of had, we had this loose idea that sales could really use this. And we had some experience doing sales, and we had a product that kind of loosely supported lending itself to the sales use case as well. So we were like, let's try this new thing for 3 months. If it's good, keep on doing it. If it's not good, then we'll go back to the old thing or figure out what to do next. So we had this theory that sales is a good use case, and we have friends who work in B2B SaaS. So let's try going to mid-sized B2B SaaS companies and for 3 months from January 25th to April 25th, we're going to build this product, build a demo of it, sell it to those B2B SaaS companies, and we're going to see if we can land, at least one annual contract. And then once we get past that step, let's see if we can get 100K ARR in the next 3 months. So
it's you put yourself into an accelerator, right? Like it was a self-imposed kind of requirements of an accelerator. We're going to build something and see if we can go and sell it in 3 months.
Yeah. It was kind of like that. And I mean, in some ways it was a little different. In others, because when we went through YC back in 2016, actually. And I think actually a key part of that accelerator experience was just constantly being around people who were also at that same stage of the business. But I think one of the tough things about, trying to start a company outside of the confines of an accelerator is like, you're not surrounded by people who have like good habits drop down on top of them from the YC partners. You kind of have to create these good habits for yourselves. And that's kind of where I think my co-founder came up with this idea of let's do this for 3 months. And we liked that a lot because we could just hammer home the state of April 25th. What are we going to do by April 25th?
Mm-hmm. I think there's something beautiful about adding a constraint, especially when I think about any of the either new sales initiatives or product initiatives that I've tried to launch. There's always the perfect solution. And the perfect solution to the problem is 18 months. And 18 months is a mythical time period that doesn't actually exist in software development. Like if it takes 18 months, you don't fully understand the problem, it's never going to get built.
Yeah. Also, the thing is, like, if you do it that slowly, I think the human mind is actually really, really bad at taking in a bunch of different, like, sensory inputs, contradictory sensory inputs, and making some sort of coherent picture of all of that. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you're going to say, I'm going to build this thing over the course of 18 months. Over the course of 18 months, if you're not prioritizing getting feedback, doing customer development calls, you're going to end up getting a bunch of different feedback from a bunch of different sources, and it's going to come staggered at various points of that 18-month period. And you're not going to really have any intuitive way of using each of those pieces of feedback to make your project better. Like, you're not going to be able to figure out, this is the feedback that I can, in any coherent way, you're not going to be able to figure out how to say, oh, this is good feedback. Let me incorporate that into what I'm doing. That is bad feedback. I'm going to ignore it. That feedback sounds good, but it's actually bad. So I'm going to listen to it, but I'm going to discard it and make sure we don't go down that rabbit hole. It's really, really tough to do that over an extended time period. And if you keep it simpler and you keep it to a shorter time period, it's just so much easier to actually make sense of all of the, advice that you're getting.
Totally. You get a chance to process it all at the same time, as opposed to your point, over a period of 18 months where you can get a little bit of recency bias creeping in. Where you're like, oh, well, this is what the person I talked to said most recently, so this is the priority.
Right, for sure. And you don't get that natural opportunity at the end of the 3 months to like recap. This is what we learned. This went great. This went wrong. Let's not do this ever. That type of thing.
Totally. I love the natural sort of endpoint of it. That's really, it totally makes sense. Talk to me about getting into the details here. What were your goals? Like, I heard you say you wanted to build some stuff and get to one customer. Was that the goal?
Yeah. So we had we wanted to do this in a way that like we had one goal and then like a second goal that's stacked on top of this. So like not two goals that you can pursue at once, but like kind of a baby goal and then a more ambitious goal. And the reason why we wanted to do it this way is that we wanted to have one goal that if we missed that goal, like, okay, we really have to go back to the drawing board, back to square one, figure everything out again. And then another goal such that like, if we hit it, then it's like, we don't need to change a single thing. We are on the right path. We just keep on going and then like success will follow. And as you can probably guess, right? Like we hit the first one and we missed the second one, which that's kind of what we were anticipating was going to happen. Maybe, I don't know, I thought maybe half the time that would happen, maybe a quarter of the time we'd miss both, and then a quarter of the time we'd hit both. So I think we learned a ton from doing all of this. And I think we learned so much more than we would have learned if we just kind of puttered along for, 13 weeks without this explicit series of goals to hit.
Love this. So before we get into the learnings and the outcomes,
Yeah.
can you talk to me a little bit about what you did specifically in this 3-month period?
Yeah, sure. So in the very beginning, right, like our mindset was we are going to build a sales simulation to basically to go after B2B SaaS companies that have teams of SDRs. And what we did for our previous simulator, like the customer support one, it was kind of one size fits all in some ways.
Mhm.
Like we did some light tweaking and customizations for companies, but the premise of the customer support assessment is that you get dropped into this simulator. You are a customer support representative for an e-commerce company called Max's Reptile Emporium, and you're going to help 5 reptile buyers. You're going to help them like basically reset their passwords, get refunds, talk them through which coupons are the best, et cetera, like talk to unhappy customers. And it was very much a one size fits all thing that worked for us actually because people understood what e-commerce was and people, just like had a good intuitive understanding that a one size fits all test, not the end of the world for customer support. So we had that one size fits all mindset. And we figured that, look, let's go after B2B SaaS companies because that's what we know. That's where like, my friends are like founders. A lot of my friends are like founders of B2B SaaS companies or like B2B services type companies. So that's what we figured we'd go after.
Cool.
So we started off by doing that, and we did everything the right way, did it all by the book, got these customer development interviews lined up, used our network, talked to like 20, 30 companies, and it was fucking so demoralizing, man. Like nobody wanted this shit at all. Like I even like went to companies' offices, talked to people, talked to some sales enablement managers, made a trip out to San Francisco to talk to companies, did all of that. No one wanted it. And in retrospect, it's like pretty obvious why people didn't want it, like with interest rates going way up, being low for a while, going way up, mid-sized B2B SaaS companies, super over leveraged, tons of like people on the sales teams who were, not really pulling their weight, but we're there to help the SaaS companies expand more. You could justify it to yourself when interest rates are super low. And then this was right around the time when all of these like SaaS companies starting in the public markets were taking a huge haircut, and that trickled down to larger like privately held SaaS companies. And the companies that we were going after were like companies on that border between, some of them were publicly traded, some of them were kind of larger private Series D type B2B SaaS companies. And
you don't need a hiring tool if you're going to be laying off a third of your workforce.
You don't need a hiring tool, man. And like
a layoff tool.
You need a layoff tool. Yeah. And like people were telling us like, and the thing is like, it would be one thing if everyone told us that like, oh, this is cool. Could we use this to like say which of our people are good so we can figure out who to keep? But that's not what people were saying. Like I would just hop on these calls with people, and it was just like very obvious from like the first minute of the call that they just got on the call as a favor to their friend who like is one of our investors. And it's kind of a shitty feeling, man. Like, it's like, it feels like you're just pulling favors and like nothing's coming from it. And you think about the person who you asked to make the intro, and it's like, geez, what are they getting from it? Like this whole thing is stupid. So that's what we
context. Because you're totally right. It's a shitty feeling. Yeah. Once you finish the call, you take a minute to mourn the loss of the call, of like this. You mourn the loss of the opportunity, of the potential.
Yes.
These are actually the best calls. These are the most productive calls that you could possibly have, because the alternative is you go and spend 18 months building a tool that nobody wants to buy. And so like in some ways, geez, that must have sucked. And other ways you're like, well, let's flip a negative into a positive. It just saved us a ton of time.
For sure. And honestly, man, that's how it felt for the first like 8 to 10 of those. For the first 8 to 10 of them, it was actually really, really easy. As someone who's like done this before, it was really easy to be like, okay, cool. We learned a lot from that. But then we tried like some slight variations on a theme of reaching out to other B2B SaaS companies, slightly smaller ones, whatever, and hearing the same exact thing on like our 15th, 20th, 23rd customer development discovery call. And just like, not a great feeling, man. like super demoralizing. I think maybe 5 or 6 weeks in, I was just like, this isn't going anywhere. And then we tried reaching out to a different type of company.
Can I pause right here?
Yes.
Because I want to talk to the audience for a minute. And one of the reasons, the sneaky reason why I wanted to have Dean on the conversation, the audience is the microphone. Now, apparently, I just kind of, anyway, wanted to have Dean on the episode here is so many customers or so many of like people I've talked to, they get, as a founder that's not into sales, they take this and they get to the same point that Dean was at, maybe at the beginning of January. They say, okay, well, we want to go and we want to explore, and they try and hire an SDR or they try and hire an outsourcing firm. And we're not saying you shouldn't hire an outsourcing firm, but if you outsource your ownership over the problem to another individual, you miss out, you're more likely to miss out on exactly what Dean is observing. These were terrible calls. I'm sure they sucked to be on. And at a certain point, it was probably the most productive calls, even though they felt bad. Is that a fair comment there, Dean? I just want to highlight that.
I think it was, I mean, I would have rather never have done those calls, but they were necessary. Like I'll tell you what, given where our collective minds as a company were at on January 24th, right before we started this experiment, given our best guess as to where our initial customers would come from, there was no option but to go through these calls. And there was also like, I think I know myself pretty decently when it comes to the psychology of this stuff. I know that if I had outsourced this to someone else and it had failed, I would have been like, well, they failed because they're them. And if I'd done it myself, then I would have succeeded. But I did it. And it was a total slog, man. It didn't work at all. And so after maybe, or during week 6, at the end of week 5, beginning of week 6, we were just like, this isn't working at all. Like, it's not even close to working. And, actually, quick tangent. I think one of the things that made this unnecessarily painful was that I wasn't using any one of the trillion AI note taker pieces of software during this process. So I was just like transcribing all of these notes by hand. And it's like, you have to do that, but it actually makes it like twice as painful without really bringing any tangible benefit. So kind of partway into this experiment, I started using one of these, and it made everything a lot easier with no downsides. I think it costs like $59 a month or something like that. And we get transcripts, and we get like, it like automatically pulls out the next steps so that I don't have to just like go in and like scrub through my notes to do that. I don't forget about it. So big plug for whichever one of those pieces of software you decide to use. Big plug for that as a concept in general.
Totally. Even if it's just hitting record on Zoom, like having that data, having that transcription, super critical. Sidebar on the sidebar, Dean, if you're doing this again, I got a buddy he's got a tool that will extract jobs to be done statements from your recordings.
Oh, cool.
If you happen to be doing it again and you want to
nice. Yeah. That is
back to that later.
Yeah, that's actually super helpful to know. But yeah, where were we?
We were talking about getting into the second month and what changed, what you did differently in the second month based on the feedback.
Yeah. So like a couple of weeks into the second month, we were just like, hey, this isn't working. What do we do? And we went back to the drawing board a little bit, and we decided to reach out to, we didn't know that this type of company existed actually. So what I did at a certain point is just kind of out of a lack of better ideas. I know that, like one thing that I always knew that I could do, but never really got around to doing is just like, if I'm out of ideas, I can always just go on LinkedIn and just look at like every single company on LinkedIn and just kind of play LinkedIn chat roulette and see what's a good company. Hey, maybe this is a good company. So I kind of did that.
LinkedIn chat roulette. That's the best.
Yeah, man. I went through my LinkedIn feed and I just scrolled for, I think like a solid 2.5 hours, just looking at everyone posting like just absolute garbage, scrolling through it, reading it, doing the little hover thing where you see what company they work at, and just like looking at each of the companies. I'm like, could this company possibly use what we're doing? And that was actually 2.5 hours really, really well spent. because that taught me about the existence of this type of company, which is basically like a sales development outsourcer, or they just do, they'll do lead generation. Sometimes they're called lead generation companies. Sometimes they're called like SDR outsourcing companies, whatever. But basically we decided, I found these, and then I went to like G2 or Clutch.co, one of those, figured out how to slice it by what are all the companies out there that will outsource the sales process for you. And then I was like, well, let me try to go talk to those companies. Like, they're probably hiring, because like, if they're not, like, I used to run a company like that for customer support, and it's like, well, if we're not hiring, then we're dead. So, because it's a high turnover position. So like, firstly, if they're alive, they must be hiring. So I had kind of made a list of, I don't know, back up 50 of my favorite of those types of companies, and just started a cold outreach campaign for that. And it worked really well. I mean, I have like kind of no other way to put it, but like, it just worked well. People were responding. I tried like general purpose sales outreach campaigns for B2B SaaS companies, and response rates for those were just total trash, totally abysmal. I did that kind of in parallel with like asking for intros, but just reaching out cold to outsourcing founders ended up working. And I think that like, maybe it was a combination of like them being a better target for this product, combined with just, me having more to say to like the founder of an outsourcing company than to like some director of global sales development at a B2B SaaS company. But that ended up actually working a lot better. And we started, having conversations with them. It was still really rocky in the beginning, because one of the things that I think customer development calls really, really help with is that when you first start talking to people about something, like, selling software for like something that you've made, it's like very different from selling washing machines or selling insurance or selling cars, because not only is there no playbook on how to talk about it, but there's also no playbook on the receiver's end for how to receive a pitch about something like that. Like, I kind of know, I've never like, if I go and try to buy a car, like, I kind of know how to buy a car. But like, if I'm trying to buy a piece of software that solves a problem that I kind of like, haven't really thought about that much, I don't really know how to buy that software really. Like, people can pitch it to me, but I don't really know how to buy or evaluate it. So there's like uncertainty on both ends of it. And what that means is that it's deceptively difficult figuring out how to pitch a new thing, or even not even pitch, that's too strong of a word. It's deceptively difficult figuring out how to talk about a new thing, because it's a customer development call, right? Like, you're not even going into it to pitch, you're going into it to learn how to talk about the problem. But it takes a ton of reps, I think, to actually figure out like, okay, what is even the problem? Like, someone who has this problem, someone who clearly has a problem of this shape, because they're down to talk to you for 15, 20, 30, 45 minutes. Like, how do you even articulate that problem? How do you start talking about it? And like, not only how do you describe it with high fidelity, but like, how do you describe the product in a way that gets yourself excited about it? How do you describe the product in a way that kind of puts you in the right headspace to, just like find a potential customer for what you're doing? So that's kind of what we spent like the next 3 to 4 weeks on, is just, okay, great. We're reaching out to these companies. There's clearly mutual interest, but figuring out even just like what features they need and what products, they want, and how to talk about it. So that's what we spent kind of the next, the first 5 or 6 weeks was kind of spent on this wild goose chase, but then the next 3 to 4 weeks was spent just figuring out like, hey, what does a demo look like for this? How do we put together a great demo? How do we talk to companies about this? Even though we know these like sales outsourcers are interested. So that's what we did for that part.
I love that. I know you could have hired an AE and said, hey, go figure this out for me, but I love that you did it yourself. I'm a huge fan of founders doing like handling the first $1 million in sales, because there's nobody that knows the customer and your capability better. And that's really all a sales conversation is trying to get to know the customer. Hey, you've got this shape problem. We have this shape solution. Does it fit? Yes, no, right? Like, that's really, especially in the early days when you're trying to find product market fit, that is like, that is basically what you're looking for.
Yeah.
I'm curious so the outcome from this, it sounds like you hit one of the goals, you missed the second goal. Talk to me about how do you see the outcome and what comes next?
Yeah. So I think we got we made it part of the way to the second goal. And we actually saw really interesting progress in the last 2 or 3 weeks of the experiment that came from a totally different direction. And we got some inbound interest from some like Series B-ish startups that were hiring sales. And we were talking to them and just kind of on a whim, we tried customizing the sales simulation to match the product that they were selling. And that's something that we hadn't really considered before. But when that inbound interest came from startups, that's like when this really, really started clicking. That plus like working with BPOs who had, they work with a ton of outsourcers who sell on behalf of a bunch of different companies. All the pieces kind of just started clicking together at the very end of the experiment, where we realized this one size fits all solution that we were previously building, this approach for building like a sales hiring product, it's not the right approach. What would be better is if we had a sales simulator where instead of it being like on behalf of, we did Max's Reptile Emporium for like the customer support one. We invented this like B2B ads platform called Conference.Ly that you sell ads on their behalf. We invented that as sort of the company that you're role playing as a salesperson for the sales one assessment. And we just realized that, no, we can't do it like that. What we have to do is we have to make it easy to swap out Conference.Ly for the company that we're actually selling to. And I think that was actually the biggest takeaway from this experiment. And without the experiment, it wouldn't have been possible for us to like reach this point of realization where it's like, okay, not only are we not really trying to go after these mid-sized B2B SaaS companies, but also this thing that we were pitching, this kind of one size fits all sales hiring solution, that's not the right way of going about doing it. And we would have never learned it if we hadn't gone through the process of just trying to figure out, okay, what are these companies actually looking for? The commonalities in these customer interviews is that people would just drop hints that they would find this tool a lot more interesting if instead of it being Conference.Ly, this kind of made up company, if it was actually their company. So at the end of the experiment, we were just like, okay, great, let's figure out how to do this. Like with the outsourcing company that we ended up signing an annual deal with, we were like, okay, great. What we're gonna do on our end is we're gonna build software that makes it super, super easy for us to take this generalized assessment that we have and make it such that for each of the companies that you're doing sales on behalf of, like we're gonna make the test work for that specific company. So then you can take that test, go to your client, and then say, look, we're giving people specialized tests to see if it makes sense to put you on their account. Or for the SaaS companies, like, hey, we have this generative AI solution that allows us to basically take your buyer personas and your value props and see if someone reads all of that information, see if they're able to digest it and do a decent job, prospecting or writing cold emails or doing cold calls or leaving voicemails. So yeah, that was great, man. Like without doing this experiment, we wouldn't have realized that that was the path of least resistance to growing this business.
And just a clarifying question here, roughly how much work was it? Like weeks, months to do that last customization or the last add to the product?
Yeah. Well, the first time we customized it, it took about maybe 40 hours of work between my co-founder and me. Second time took maybe 8 hours. Seventh time we did it took about, 25 minutes. So yeah, it's been getting a lot faster because this is one of these things that generative AI is really, really, really freaking good at. Like, there's a lot of stuff there's a lot of hype around it, and there's a lot of, like people, I think, in bad faith posting, like sharing very bad use cases for generative AI. But like for this, what we're trying to do is we're trying to just on the fly generate buyer personas and value props for something someone is selling. And it's not rocket science. We can do that with generative AI. And then what we're also trying to do is generate basically plausible targets to sell to. And it's like this generative AI stuff, like one, it's come so far in the last like 10 years. Like I did my senior project at MIT on like basically using natural language to classify different article types. And the tools that we have available to us like in 2023 are so different, so much better than what we had in 2013. But like, two, I lost my train of thought.
I think the point I was, but yeah, it's okay. The point I was driving towards was, I think, you spent 3 months on this and learned a ton of stuff. At the end of the day, the total time it took you to make this change, let's call it a month. Say what you learned was like a month's worth of work.
Yeah.
You've been working on this for months. Let's say you've been working on this for 6 months.
Yeah.
It was an extra 15% of development time. And so you were just loose math. Don't check my math here, but
okay.
It's directionally correct. You were 85% of the way there. You had 85% of the product when you went into this experiment, and you got crickets.
Okay. I get the question now. All right. I think I can drive this in the right direction. So ask me the question again.
So you were 85% of the way, you had 85% of the product.
Yeah.
Let's say the additional 15% is what you had to adapt to the market.
Yeah.
Right. I'm always kind of using this. I'm like, you had this, customer's pain was this, you got to kind of shift it a couple of degrees so it fits really well together.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a question or a point, but I think like you kind of answered it with like, if there was a month's worth of work you've been working on for 6 months and it's 15%, you were most of the way there. And it was this last, I don't know, month, 6 weeks of like talking to customers, getting feedback that helped you understand which 15% you needed. I think was the point. Is that a fair way?
Dude, that's exactly, that's exactly what it was. Like when we started out, we had this loose idea of a product and we were actually most of the way there. We just didn't know what the difference was between this product that we kind of had right now or at the beginning of the experiment and a product that we could sell. Like the difference in terms of actual development time was shockingly small. Like the two changes basically that we had to make to our assessment that worked for customer support, we had to make basically two, maybe two minor changes, right? One, we needed to create a couple assessment types that made sense for sales, but those aren't that hard actually. It's like writing cold emails, making cold calls, leaving voicemails. It wasn't that hard because we had the infrastructure in place already. And then the other thing was that we needed to figure out basically how to take the company that you're working on behalf of in the job simulator and swap it out for your company. But that's not the actual work, right? Like where the actual work is like, if you don't know where that last 15% of work comes from, you could spend years, right? Just totally in the dark, taking half-assed stabs at what people actually want. Or you could bite the bullet, have a bunch of really excruciating customer development calls that go nowhere and just keep trying different stuff until you find, like a customer segment that needs what you want badly enough that they'll kind of guide you through the growing pains and teach you, hey, this is what you need to do in order to make the product actually useful for us. And the problem is that no one is like enough of an oracle to actually tell you what that is. You need to get that from a bunch of different people. And I don't think there's a single customer development call where we went on it and everything they said was 100% like true. It was like, the good ones, they'll say a bunch of stuff that's directionally accurate and then a bunch of stuff that's very hyper specific to them as a company. And the trick is figuring out what are the commonalities and are there enough commonalities to actually build a business around this.
That's it, folks. That's the podcast.
Hey,
that's
right.
No, I mean, I obviously have more questions, but I mean, that is the point, right? That is why that is the right way to do sales as a founder. Sales, customer development, whatever you want to call it, like that last tip, the customer development process where you say, I've done some research and now I'm going to try and take it to market. Right. And like that to me is the thing that gets missed so many times, so frequently is people say, okay, I've done the research. Now I'm going to hire a salesperson. I'm going to hire a VP. I'm going to hire somebody. I need you to go figure this out. And now you outsource what is effectively the most important part of your company journey to a salesperson you hired. And nothing against salespeople. I am one, or at least I started life as a salesperson. But it's you as a founder, you're taking one of the most important, or if not the most important decision at the company. And you're saying, this is somebody else's problem.
Yeah. I mean, a good salesperson, right? Like you give them a script and they'll knock it out of the park. But if it's a new thing, you got to write the script first, right? Like it doesn't matter how good of a salesperson you are if you don't know, like, I mean, here's the thing that made the first few customer development calls so painful is that, and I didn't even put this together until I started thinking about just like, the sales experiment and recapping it. Like, I think kind of to me, what the point of customer development is almost is just figuring out where it is, where like the person you're talking to, like when and where do their eyes light up? Because like, that's what made the first 25 customer development calls. That's what made that so painful. It's just, I'd be talking to them and it's just like, there's nothing there. It's like talking to a brick wall the whole time. And like rightfully so, obvious, because they don't need our shit and they're busy and they got other things to do. But like once we started talking to like people who were founders of outsourcing companies, we were just talking to people who were like, they were just like, fuck man, this is a real problem. Like we have this problem. And like, honestly, some of the best calls were with founders who are like, I had this problem 5 years ago and I spent like 6 months building a good solution for this. I don't need the thing that you're building because we already did it ourselves and it was a huge pain in the ass. That was kind of one of the most gratifying things to hear over and over again when we were reaching out to these kind of later stage outsourcing companies. And yeah, man, like if you don't do the actual customer development calls, you're never going to build this intuition about what is it about what you're doing that makes people's eyes light up. And for us, we realized that like, oh, when people see the product, that's when they actually get interested in it. If it's someone who has this problem, when they see the actual product, then that's when their eyes light up. And that, I think, illustrates another problem of just throwing AEs at the problem, because when we realized that the product is what people really liked, then that got us thinking like, what is the GTM for this company? It's probably not going to be like a traditional enterprise sales model where we right? This like, do this cold email, do this like outreach sequence with a bunch of touch points, do a qualification call, and then like people don't get to see the product until like the third step of the process. Like that's probably not going to be the GTM for this company. Like for this company, it probably makes more sense to like start off reaching out to people cold, do like a beta program type thing, but try to work as quickly as possible to a point where people can, work as quickly as possible to a point where people can sign up for the product on their own. And while you're getting to that point, kind of have a more traditional sales process. But if that's like, if you learn something that like is like, oh, the product's really good, then if we had hired a bunch of AEs to do this, then we would have probably twisted our freaking brain in knots trying to figure out how to justify keeping these AEs around. Whereas the right thing for the business is probably to just like do founder-led for a little bit, but cut bait on that as soon as, like a more product-led growth type strategy starts working. So, I still have no idea how this is actually going to end up, but like if the product is really interesting, we should be foregrounding that.
Exactly. 2 points to make. One, I think if you hire and try and do this through an AE, there's one layer of insulation between you and the customer with the end problem. And I'm not saying the AEs can't find it. Their job is to find pain. But specifically, an AE comes with a set of firmware, which is their comp plan. And you say, hey, this is the thing that you need to sell. Go sell this. This is how you sell it. This is what I'm going to pay you to sell it. You're not paying them to do customer development. Some AEs will do this automatically, naturally, as part of their discovery process. Some AEs are great at this. Some AEs are not great at this. But I think there's an important distinction to draw between doing a customer development interview and doing an early sales call, right? The second piece I wanted to highlight, that moment where their eyes light up. Like I want to point out the forest through the trees here. Like we are looking, the point of a customer development interview, the point of starting a new company is to solve a problem that hasn't been solved before. What we are looking for is unmet needs. And that what you saw in their eyes was unmet needs. People going, oh shit, you can do this? Like that moment where they're like, oh, wait a minute, really? That is what we're looking for. Like I remember getting that for carb. And like people were going, oh, wait a minute.
Wow.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Wait, let me catch up. Wait. Like they almost didn't understand. Their brain is drawing new connections. Like they didn't know you could do that. And I'm like, this is why we start companies. This is that magic moment. This is that like founder heroine that we're all chasing this dragon, right?
Exactly, man. Exactly. Yeah.
Unmet needs. That's the whole point of all of this, is to try and find those unmet needs. If you are not saying that, you are not finding people that have unmet needs. You are finding people that have their needs met by whatever's currently out there already.
Hell yeah. I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. Like, I think for the previous business, like what you're saying about the insulation, like that's 100% correct. Like the previous business that I ran, like the outsourcing company, by the end of it, there were 3 levels of insulation between me and the people actually like doing the customer support. And just qualitatively as a business, that felt extremely different from when there were 0 levels of insulation between me and the people, you know, actually doing the support. Or even like in the very beginning, Paul and myself, we were answering a good portion of the tickets ourselves, and going from that to, okay, now we have customer support agents that we're managing. Okay, great. That still works really well. Now we have a team lead that we're managing and then customer support agents that are doing the work. That's actually working really, really well because we found really great customer support people to hire. And then we found good team leads from there. But then like once it started reaching the level where there was like there was someone managing the person who was managing the team leads. That is kind of where I began to feel that for the previous business, that I was just so far from the things that were happening that if we didn't figure out some sort of way of just like, we had to start figuring out like, how do we improve quality across the board in creative ways? Because there's just no way for me to actually see what's going on at the ground level. And that's fine if you're trying to build a larger business. And it's fine if you're trying to solve an easier problem, which is like repeatedly doing a good job answering interactions. Like it's fine. It doesn't matter how many layers of insulation there are between, like, say, the Starbucks CEO and the barista, because at the end of the day, the task or the job that the barista is performing, it's fairly routinizable. But the task of trying to figure out what the unmet need is a lot more complex and a lot harder to define. So, it doesn't matter how much more efficient you can be by hiring 2, 3, 4, 10, whatever AEs. If you're not able to actually, do that yourself, it's going to be really, really difficult to find what you actually need to build.
Exactly. It's not an efficiency. It's not a problem you want to solve with efficiency. It's a problem with sales or with your time, with anything. You're always choosing between effectiveness and efficiency. Do I want this to be maximally effective or maximally efficient? And there's always a scale. It could be related to outbound. It could be to how you handle your email, your calendar, to anything. And specifically with the job to be done of finding product market fit, this is one of those ones where you want to swing that dial all the way to as the most effective angle or level as possible. You don't want to scale it. You don't want it to be efficient at all. And so that's me standing up on my soapbox. I love the sort of the comparison you drew there. And the last question I have for you, I get the feeling you would do this again. What would you do differently next time?
Yeah, man. So we're actually in the middle of doing this again. We have another goal for July 25th. We like this. This is great. We kind of stumbled upon this as a strategy and it works for us. So we're doing it again. I think the number one thing that I would do is I would parallelize more in the process of reaching out to people. I think that what we did from the beginning is that we kind of unwittingly put most of our eggs in the basket of like, let's reach out to mid-sized B2B SaaS companies with this one size fits all product. And like, what ended up happening kind of in retrospect was like, that didn't work. And we spent like 5-6 weeks on that, leaving us like 7 or 8 weeks left to cram the rest of the experiment in. And yeah, we're not, that's probably the biggest takeaway for me, where it's like, before starting any of these things, just take some time, take maybe a few hours or whatever. Like if I had done that, like scrolling through LinkedIn for 2.5 hours or whatever, and just trying to really figure out who all the potential customers could have been, then instead of reaching out to a bunch of people who didn't need our product and only changing course once we just started feeling incredibly bad about the whole thing, we would have been able to reach out to like our top 2 or 3 candidates at first. And then, maybe we would have seen we would have seen, progress on one of them and no progress on the other two, then maybe we could have changed tack a little bit and figured out how to, find like subgroups of companies and people who are more like whatever's working best. And I think that we probably could have had a much higher chance, honestly, of hitting our second goal, because we would have been able to find a potential really good customer earlier, build a demo for them really earlier, get the product to a point where it catches up to the demo earlier, and then get the product team back on making really good demos like sooner. And for us, we ended this 3-month-long experiment in a bunch of technical debt because we were scrambling to make the product match the demo that we had pitched to companies. And so that ended up being really, really tough. But I think that if we had started earlier, reaching out to 3 kind of different target customers, 3 target customers who felt pretty different, then I think there would have been a much higher chance that like after 2 or 3 weeks, we would have seen some real progress and we would have found some people who we actually could have reached out to. So that's one thing that I'm doing differently right now, where for this product, like I'm reaching out to several different personas. I'm reaching out to directors of like people who are like managers or directors of sales development at smaller SaaS companies, doing that. I'm reaching out to people who are founders of smaller outsourcing companies. And I am also looking into reaching out to people who are leaders in customer support, because the original product that we have, it makes sense for customer support as well. And if nothing else, we could build a wait list for that. And then when we're ready to build out better generative AI scenarios for customer support, then we'll have people who can do that. So yeah, that's like probably my biggest takeaway is don't lock in, even if you're doing it unconsciously. Like that's how we did it. We unconsciously locked in on one very specific buyer type. And it turned out that they just didn't need what we were selling. And we used up a lot of time going after that, much more than we should have.
I love that. Nothing to add. That's perfect. Well done. And congrats on the pivot, or pivot, whatever you want to call it, adjustment on the learnings.
Yeah.
The process is awesome. I appreciate you sharing. I was going to shout out to the audience that if you fall into any of these groups that Dean is talking about, hit Dean up, because I've done a couple customer development interviews with him. They are easy, not a high pressure sales call. I think that's one thing that I think a lot of people suspect is like, oh, these custom interviews, these are just like a sneaky sales call. It's not. Dean's been there to learn. And I think
they're really not. Yeah. I think that's the wrong approach to it, completely the wrong approach to it.
Yeah.
I think it would be psychologically devastating actually to try to treat it as a sneaky sales call, because one, a lot of the time you're reaching out to people who are just who don't even have the problem that you're trying to solve with what you're building. And like, I think a sales call is fine if there's like mutual interest on both sides, but like, most of the people you talk to, there's actually not going to be mutual interest. It's just like you're learning about their problems and like seeing if there's a fit. And so if you try to go into it like a sales call, like one, it's like a pretty unethical thing to do if you're promising someone like, hey, I'm just trying to learn about problems. And then you get on the call and you're like trying to learn about their problems. But two, like if you do that, I think that like if you do that and you're like a good salesperson, I think what you're going to end up doing is you're going to close a few deals from that, but they're going to be deals closed with like people who don't actually need the thing that you're selling. And they might be with people who have very different needs from what you're building. And I think that that's a way of painting yourself into a corner that's very, very hard to get out from. So I definitely think that for these calls, the goal of it should be to learn as much as you can about the other person's problems. And then like, after the call, you can kind of think about it and really critically think like, are we building something that like lines up with the problems that these people have? Or are we building something that is just totally separate? And I think a lot of the time it's going to be something that's totally separate. And that's where you have to, exercise good judgment.
And here's the best part about unmet needs. Customers will pull you in that direction. Like you don't have to sell to them. They will pull you. Say, hey, Dean, can I have this thing? Did you build this thing yet? Hey, can I pay for it? Like I've had customers, prospects, people I'm doing these interviews with stop me in the middle of the interview being like, hey, are you building this? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, can I see it? Like, I was like, no, I got to do the interview. They're like, no, okay. This answer. Show me the tool. I want to see it. I'll buy it. I'm like, they're like bullying me into the beta.
Yeah. Bullying you into paying you money. It's good.
Exactly. Shut up and take my money. Dean, thank you so much for coming on the show. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Just email me, dean@loopsupport, LOOPSUPPORT.com.
Perfect. And I'll throw a link to Loop Support in the show notes if anybody wants to check it out. Thanks, Dean, for coming on the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you all next week.